God, it's you. I've heard that Bilbo and Gandalf and his friends are out here somewhere. But I've also heard that there are trolls and that they'd just as soon eat you and boil you as say hello to you. So I've been very careful about where I'm going. Just a drink. Thanks for coming back to visit us. Again, my name is Kevin George. I'm a priest at St. Aidan's Church, and I'm pretty excited about Bilbo Baggins and the stuff that he does. And I'm really excited that last week when I heard his story told by Kate and Naomi, what a wild party these guys had. And I understand that now, as we're going to hear it read by Seth and Julianne, that he's headed out. He's headed out with his friends and going on an adventure. And you're coming along with us, and I'm going too. So we're just very happy that you guys have decided to come and spend some time with us in this beautiful story, The Hobbit. So tonight, you're going to hear 2 chapters. One of them is roast mutton. I hope that's not the word for roasted hobbits. And then you're going to hear a chapter read by Julianne called A Short Rest. And who doesn't need one of those? So thank you for coming here into the midst of where we are and what we're doing, where we can share the story of Bilbo Baggins, share the story of Gandalf and all of their adventures. And thank you to the many of you who've tuned in. We ask that you share this with your friends, enjoy the story time, and come back each week at 7 p.m. when it will go live every Friday night as we continue the adventures of Bilbo Baggins and the Hobbit.
Chapter 2. Roast Mutton. Up jumped Bilbo, and putting on his dressing gown, went into the dining room. There he saw nobody, but all the signs of a large and hurried breakfast. There was a fearful mess in the room, and piles of unwashed crocks in the kitchen. Nearly every pot and pan he possessed seemed to have been used. The washing up was so dismally real that Bilbo was forced to believe the party of the night before had not been part of his bad dreams, as he had rather hoped. Indeed, he was really relieved after all to think that they had all gone without him, and without bothering to wake him up. But with never a thank you, he thought. And yet, in a way, he could not help feeling just a trifle disappointed. The feeling surprised him. "Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins," he said to himself. "Thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age?" So he put on an apron, lit fires, boiled water, and washed up. Then he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out the dining room. By that time the sun was shining at the front, and the front door was open, letting in a warm spring breeze. Bilbo began to whistle loudly and to forget about the night before. In fact, he was just sitting down to a nice little second breakfast in the dining room by the open window when walked in Gandalf. "My dear fellow," he said, "whenever are you going to come? What about an early start? And here you are having breakfast, or whatever you call it, at 10:30. They left you the message because they could not wait." "What message?" said poor Mr. Baggins, all in a fluster. "Great elephants," said Gandalf. You are not at all yourself this morning. You have never dusted the mantelpiece." "What's that got to do with it? I have enough to do washing up for 14. "If you had dusted the mantelpiece, you would have found this just under the clock," said Gandalf, handing Bilbo a note, written of course on his own notepaper. This is what he read. "Thorn and Company to Burglar Bilbo greeting. For your hospitality and our sincerest thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our grateful acceptance. Terms: cash on delivery, up to and not exceeding 1/14 of total profits, if any. All traveling expenses guaranteed in any event, funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or our representatives, if occasion arises and the matter is not otherwise arranged for. Thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed repose, We have proceeded in advance to make requisite preparations, and shall wait your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn, Bywater, at 11 a.m. sharp, trusting that you will be punctual. We have the honor to remain, yours deeply, Thorin and Co. That leaves you just 10 minutes. You will have to run, said Gandalf. But, said Bilbo. No time for it, said the wizard. But, said Bilbo again. No time for that either. Off you go. To the end of his days, Bilbo could never remember how he found himself outside without a hat, a walking stick, or any money, or anything that he usually took when he went out, leaving his second breakfast half finished and quite unwashed up, pushing his keys into Gandalf's hand, and running as fast as his furry feet could carry him down the lane, past the great mill, across the water, and then on for a mile or more. Very puffed he was, and when he got to Bywater, just on the stroke of 11, he found he had come without a pocket handkerchief. Bravo, said Balin, who was standing at the inn door looking out for him. Just then all the others came around the corner of the road from the village. They were on ponies, and each pony was slung about with all kinds of baggages, packages, parcels, and paraphernalia. There was a very small pony, apparently for Bilbo. Up you two get, and off we go, said Thorin. I'm awfully sorry, said Bilbo, but I have come without my hat, and I have left my pocket handkerchief behind, and I haven't got any money. I didn't get your note until after 10:45 to be precise. Don't be precise, said Dwalin, and don't worry, you will have to manage without the pocket handkerchiefs, and a good many other things before you get to the journey's end. As for hat, I've got a spare hood and cloak in my luggage. That's how they all came to start, jogging off from the inn one fine morning just before May, on laden ponies, and Bilbo was wearing a dark green hood, a little weather-stained, and a dark green cloak borrowed from Dwalin. They were too large for him, and he looked rather comic. What his father Bungo would have thought of him, I daren't think. His only comfort was he couldn't be mistaken for a dwarf, as he had no beard. They had not been riding very long, when up came Gandalf, very splendid on a white horse. He had brought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs, and Bilbo's pipe and tobacco. So after that, the party went along very merrily, and they told stories or sang songs as they rode forward all day, except, of course, when they stopped for meals. These didn't come quite as often as Bilbo would have liked them, but still he began to feel that adventures were not so bad after all. At first they had passed through Hobbit lands, a wide, respectable country inhabited by decent folk, with good roads, an inn or two, and then a dwarf or a farmer ambling by on business. Then they came to lands where people spoke strangely, and sang songs Bilbo had never heard before. Now they had gone on far into the lone lands, where there were no people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were the dreary hills, rising higher and higher, dark with trees. On some of them there were old castles with an evil look, as if they had been built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy. For the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. Mostly it had been as good as May can be, even in the merry tales. But now it was cold and wet. In the lone lands they had been obliged to camp when they could, but at least it had been dry. To think it will soon be June, grumbled Bilbo as he splashed along behind the others in a very muddy track. It was after tea time. It was pouring with rain, and had been all day. His hood was dripping into his eyes. His cloak was full of water. The pony was tired and stumbled on the stones. The others were too grumpy to talk, and I'm sure the rain has got into the dry clothes and into the food bags, thought Bilbo. Bother burgling and everything to do with it. I wish I was at home in my nice hole by the fire with the kettle beginning to sing. It was not the last time that he wished that. Still the dwarves jogged on, never turning around or taking any notice of the Hobbit. Somewhere behind the gray clouds the sun must have gone down, for it began to get dark as they went down into a deep valley with a river at the bottom. Wind got up, and willows along its banks bent and sighed. Fortunately, the road went on over an ancient stone bridge, for the river, swollen with rains, came rushing down from the hills and mountains in the north. It was nearly night when they had crossed over. The wind had broke up the grey clouds, and a wandering moon appeared above the hills between the flying rags. Then they stopped, and Thorin muttered something about supper. And where shall we get a dry patch to sleep on? Not until then did they notice that Gandalf was missing. So far he had come all the way with them, never saying if he was in the adventure or merely keeping them company for a while. He had eaten most, talked most, and laughed most. But now he simply was just not there at all. Just when a wizard would not have been most useful too, groaned Dori and Nori, who shared the hobbits' views about regular meals plenty and often. They decided in the end that they would have to camp where they were. They moved to a clump of trees, and though it was drier under them, the wind shook the rain off the leaves, and the drip was most annoying. Also, the mischief seemed to have got down into the fire. Dwarves can make a fire almost anywhere out of almost anything, wind or no wind, but they could not do it that night. Not even Oin and Gloin, who were especially good at it. Then one of the ponies took fright at nothing and bolted. He got into the river before they could catch him, and before they could get him out again, Feely and Keely were nearly drowned, and all the baggage that he carried was washed away off him. Of course, it was mostly food, and there was mighty little left for supper, and less for breakfast. They were all sat glum and wet and muttering, while Oin and Gloin went on trying to light the fire, and quarreling about it. Bilbo was sadly reflecting that adventures are not all pony rides in May sunshine, when Balin, who was always their lookout man, said, "There's a light over there." And there was a man. "Oh, there's a light over there." There was a hill some way off with trees on it, pretty thick in parts. Out of the dark mass of the trees they could now see a light shining, a reddish, comfortable-looking light, as it might be a fire or torches twinkling. When they had looked at it for some while, they fell to arguing. Some said no, and some said yes. Some said they could but go and see, and anything was better than little supper, less breakfast, and wet clothes all the night. Others said, these parts are none too well known, and are too near the mountains. Travelers seldom come this way now. The old maps are no use. Things have changed for the worse, and the road is unguarded. They have seldom even heard of the king round here, and the less inquisitive you are as you go along, the less trouble you are likely to find. Some said, after all, there are 14 of us. Others said, where has Gandalf got to? This remark was repeated by everybody. Then too the rain began to pour down worse than ever, and Oin and Gloin began to fight. That settled it. After all, we have got a burglar with us, they said. And so they made off, leading their ponies with all due and proper caution in the direction of the light. They came to the hill and were soon in the wood. Up the hill they went, but there was no proper path to be seen, such as might lead to a house or a farm. And do what they could, they made a deal of rustling and crackling and creaking, and a good deal of grumbling and dratting as they went through the trees in the pitch dark. Suddenly the red light shone out very bright through the tree trunks not far ahead. Now it's the burglar's turn, they said, meaning Bilbo. You must go on and find all about that light, and what it is for, and if it all is perfectly safe and canny, said Thorin to the hobbit. Now scuttle off and come back quickly. If all is well. If not, come back if you can. If you can't, hoot twice like a barn owl and once like a screech owl, and we will do what we can. Off Bilbo had to go. Before he could explain that he could not hoot even once like any kind of owl, any more than fly like a bat. But at any rate, hobbits can move quietly in woods, absolutely quietly. They take a pride in it, and Bilbo had sniffed more than once at what he called all dwarfish racket as they went along. Though I don't suppose you or I would have noticed anything at all on a windy night, not if the whole cavalcade has passed 2 feet off. As for Bilbo, walking primly towards the red light, I don't suppose even a weasel would have stirred a whisker at it. So, naturally, he got right up to the fire, for fire it was, without disturbing anyone, and this is what he saw. 3 very large persons sitting around a very large fire of beech logs. They were toasting mutton on the long spits of wood and licking the gravy off their fingers. There was a fine toothsome smell. Also there was a barrel of good drink at hand, and they were drinking out of jugs. But they were trolls, obviously trolls. Even Bilbo, in spite of his sheltered life, could see that, from the great heavy faces of them and their size and the shape of their legs, not to mention their language, which was not drawing room fashion at all. Mutton yesterday, mutton today, and blimey if it don't look like mutton again tomorrow, said one of the trolls. Never a blinking bit of man-flesh have we had for long enough, said a second. What the hell William was thinking of bring us to these parts at all? Beats me, and the drinking running short. What's more, he said, jogging the elbow of William, who was taking a pull at his jug. William choked. Shut your mouth, he said as soon as he could. You can't expect folk to stop here forever just to be et by you and Bert. You've et a village and a half between you since we come down from the mountains. How much more do you want? And time's been up for our way. When you'd have that, said, thank you, Bill, for a nice bit o' fat valley mutton like what this is. He took a big bite off a sheep's leg and was roasting, and wiped his lips on his sleeve. Yes, I am afraid trolls do behave like that, even those with only one head each. After hearing all this, Bilbo ought to have done something at once. Either he should have gone back quietly and warned his friends that there were 3 fair-sized trolls at hand in a nasty mood, quite likely to try roast a dwarf, or even pony for a change, or else he should have done a bit of good quick burglaring. A really first-class and legendary burglar would at this point have picked the troll's pockets. It is nearly always worthwhile if you can manage it. Pinched the very mutton off the spits, purloined the beer, and walked off without their noticing him. Others more practical but with less professional pride would perhaps have stuck a dagger into each of them before they observed it. Then the night could have been spent cheerily. Bilbo knew it. He had read a good of many things he had never seen or done. He was very much alarmed, as well as disgusted. He wished himself 100 miles away, and yet somehow he could not go straight back to Thorin and company empty-handed. So he stood and hesitated in the shadows of the various burglarious proceedings he had heard of. Picking the troll's pockets seemed the least difficult. So at last he crept behind a tree and just behind William. Bert and Tom went off to the barrel. William was having another drink. Then Bilbo plucked up courage and put his little hand in William's enormous pocket. There was a purse in it, as big as a bag to Bilbo. Ha, he thought, warming his new work as he lifted it out carefully. This is the beginning. It was. Trolls' purses are mischief, and this was no exception. Who are you? It squeaked as it left the pocket, and William turned round at once and grabbed Bilbo by the neck before he could duck behind the tree. Blimey, Bert, look what I've copped, said William. What is it? Said the others coming up. Lummy if I knows. What are you? Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit, said poor Bilbo, shaking all over and wondering how to make owl noise before they throttled him. A hobbit, they said, a bit startled. Trolls are slow in the uptake and mighty suspicious about anything new to them. What's a hobbit got to do with my pocket anyway, said William. And can you cook him, said Tom. You can try, said Bert, picking up a skewer. He wouldn't make above a mouthful, said William, who had already had a fine supper, not when he was skinned and boned. Perhaps there are more like 'em around about, and we might make a pie, said Bert. Here you, are there any more of your sort of sneaking in these here woods, you nasty little rabbit? he said, looking at the hobbit's furry feet and picked them up by the toes and shook them. Yes, lots, said Bilbo, before he remembered not to give his friends away. No, none at all, not one, he said immediately afterwards. What do you mean, Bert said, holding him right way up by the hair this time. What I say, said Bilbo, gasping. And please don't cook me, kind sirs. I'm good to cook myself, and cook better than I cook, if you can see what I mean. I'll cook beautifully for you, and a perfectly beautiful breakfast for you, if only you won't have me for supper. Poor little blighter, said William. He had already had as much supper as he could hold, and also he had lots of beer. Poor little blighter, let him go. Not till he says what he means by lots and none at all, said Bert. I don't want to have me throat cut in me sleep. Hold his toes in the fire until he talks. I won't have it, said William. I caught him anyway. You're a fat fool, William, said Bert, as I've said before this evening, and you're a lout. And I won't take that from you, Bill Huggins, said Bert. He put his fist in William's eye. Then there was a gorgeous row. Bilbo had just enough wits left when Bert dropped him on the ground to scramble out of the way of their feet before they were fighting like dogs and calling one another all sorts of perfectly true and applicable names in very loud voices. Soon they were locked in one another's arms, rolling nearly into the fire, kicking and thumping while Tom whacked at them both with a branch to bring them to their senses, and that, of course, only made them madder than ever. That would have been the time for Bilbo to have left, but his poor little feet had been very squashed in Bert's big paw, and he had no breath in his body, and his head was going round, so there he lay for a while, panting, just outside the circle of firelight. Right in the middle of the fight came up Balin. The dwarves had heard noises from the distance, and after waiting for some time for Bilbo to come back, or to hoot like an owl, they started off one by one to creep towards the light as quietly as they could. No sooner did Tom see Balin come into the light than he gave an awful howl. Trolls simply detest the very sight of dwarves, uncooked. Bert and Bill stopped the fighting immediately, and sack Tom, quick, they said, before Balin, who was wondering where in all this commotion Bilbo was, knew what was happening. A sack was over his head, and he was down. There's more to come yet, said Tom, or I'm mighty mistook. Lots and none at all it is, said he. No burrow hobbits, but lots of these here dwarves. That's about the shape of it. I reckon you're right, said Bert, and we'd best get out of the light. And so they did. With sacks in their hands that they used for carrying off mutton and other plunder, they waited in the shadows as each dwarf came up and looked at the fire, and the spilled jugs and the gnawed mutton in surprise. Pop! Went a nasty, smelly sack over his head, and he was down. Soon Dwalin lay by Balin, and Feely and Keely together, and Dory, Nori, and Ori all in a heap, and Oin and Gloin, and Biffer and Bofer and Bomber piled uncomfortably near the fire. That'll teach him, said Tom, for Biffer and Bomber had given a lot of trouble, and fought like mad, as dwarves will when concerned. Thorin came last, and he was not caught unawares. He came expecting mischief, and didn't need to see his friend's legs sticking out of sacks to tell him that things were not all well. He stood outside the shadows, some way off, and said, What's all this trouble? Who has been knocking my people about? It's trolls, said Bilbo from behind a tree. They had forgotten all about him. Oh, it's trolls, said Bilbo from behind a tree. They had forgotten all about him. They're hiding in bushes with sacks, said he. Oh, are they? Said Thorin, and he jumped forward to the fire before they could leap on him. He caught up a big branch all on fire at one end, and Bert got that end in his eye before he could step aside. That put him out of the battle for a bit. Bilbo did his best. He caught hold of Tom's leg as well as he could. It was thick as a young tree trunk, but he was sent spinning up into the top of some bushes when Tom kicked the sparks up in Thorin's face. And there's a little diagram here. Tom got the branch in his teeth for that and lost one of the front ones. It made him howl, I can tell you. But just at that moment, William came up behind and popped a sack right over Thorin's head and down to his toes. And so the fight ended. A nice pickle they were all in now. all neatly tied up in sacks with 3 angry trolls and 2 with burns and bashes to remember, sitting by them, arguing whether they should roast them slowly or mince them fine and boil them, or just sit on them one by one and squash them into jelly. And Bilbo up in a bush, with his clothes and skin torn, not daring to move or for fear they should hear him. It was just then that Gandalf came back. No one saw him. The trolls had decided to roast the dwarves now and eat them later. That was Bert's idea, and after a lot of argument they had all agreed to it. No good roasting him now. It'll take all night, said a voice. Bert thought it was William's. Don't start the argument all over again, Bill, he said, or it will take all night. Who's arguing, said William, who thought it was Bert who had spoken. You are, said Bert. You're a liar, said William, and so the argument began all over again and over again. In the end, they decided to mince them fine and boil them. So they got a great black pot and took out their knives. No good boiling them. We ain't got no water, and it's a long way to the well and all, said a voice. Bert and William thought it was Tom's. Shut up, said they, or we'll never have done, and you can fetch the water yourself if you say any more. Shut up yourself, said Tom, who thought it was William's voice. Who's arguing with you? I'd like to know. You're a booby, said William. Booby yourself, said Tom. And so the argument began all over again, and went on hotter than ever, until at last they decided to sit on the sacks one by one and squash them, and boil them next time. Who shall we sit on first, said the voice. Better sit on the last fellow first, said Bert, whose eye had been damaged by Thorin. He thought Tom was talking. Don't talk to yourself, said Tom. But if you want to sit on the last one, sit on him. Which is he? The one with the yellow stockings, said Bert. Nonsense, the one with the gray stockings, said a voice like William's. I made sure it was yellow, said Bert. Yellow it was, said William. Then what did you say it was gray for, said Bert. I never did. Tom said it. That I never did, said Tom. It was you. 2 to 1, so shut your mouth, said Bert. Who are you a-talking to, said William. Now stop it, said Tom and Bert together. The night's getting on, and the dawn comes early. Let's get on with it. Dawn take you all and be stoned to you, said a voice that sounded like William's, but it wasn't. For just at that moment the light came over the hill, and there was a mighty twitter in the branches. William never spoke, for he stood and turned to stone as he stooped. And Bert and Tom were stuck like rocks as they looked at him, and there they stand to this day, all alone unless the birds perch on them. For trolls, as you probably know, must be underground before dawn, or they go back to the stuff of the mountains they are made of, and never move again. That is what had happened to Bert and Tom and William. Excellent, said Gandalf, as he stepped from behind a tree and helped Bilbo climb down out of the thorn bush. Then Bilbo understood. It was the wizard's voice that had kept the trolls bickering and quarreling, until the light came and made an end of them. The next thing was to untie the sacks and let out the dwarves. They were nearly suffocated and very annoyed. They had not at all enjoyed lying there listening to the trolls making plans for roasting them and squashing them and mincing them. They had to hear Bilbo's account of what happened to him twice over before they were satisfied. Silly time to go practicing pinching and pocket picking, said Bomber, when what we wanted was fire and food. And that's just what you wouldn't have got of those fellows without a struggle in any case, said Gandalf. Anyhow, you are wasting time now. Don't you realize that trolls must have a cave or a hole dug somewhere near to hide from the sun in? We must look into it. They searched about and soon found the marks of trolls' stony boots going away through the trees. They followed the tracks up the hill until hidden by bushes they came on a big door of stone leading to a cave. But they could not open it, not though they all pushed while Gandalf tried various incantations. Would this be any good? Asked Bilbo, when they were getting tired and angry. I found it on the ground where the trolls had their fight. He held out a largest key, though no doubt William had thought it very small and secret. Must have fallen out of his pocket, very luckily, before he was turned to stone. Why on earth didn't you mention it before? They cried. Gandalf grabbed it and fitted it into the keyhole. Then the stone door swung back with one big push, and they all went inside. There were bones on the floor, and a nasty smell was in the air. But there was a good deal of food jumbled carelessly on the shelves and on the ground, and among untidy litter of plunder, of all sorts of brass buttons to pots full of gold coins standing in a corner. There were lots of clothes too, hanging on the walls, too small for trolls. I am afraid they belonged to victims, and among them were several swords of various makes, shapes, and sizes. Two caught their eyes particularly because of their beautiful scabbards and jeweled hilts. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of these, and had Bilbo took a knife in a leather sheath. It would have made only a tiny pocket knife for a troll, but it was as good as a short sword for the hobbit. These look like good blades, said the wizard, half drawing them and looking at them curiously. They were not made by any troll, nor any smith among men in these parts and days. But when we can read the runes on them, we shall know more about them. Let's get out of this horrible smell, said Feely. So they carried out the pots of coins and such food as untouched and looked so fit to eat. Also 1 barrel of ale, which was still full. By that time they felt like breakfast, and being very hungry, they did not turn their noses up at what they had got from the trolls. Trolls' larder. Their own provisions were very scanty. Now they had bread and cheese and plenty of ale and bacon to toast in the embers of the fire. After that they slept, for the night had been disturbed, and they did nothing more till the afternoon. Then they brought up their ponies and carried away with the pots of gold and buried them very secretly not far from the track by the river, putting a great many spells over them, just in case they ever had the chance to come back and recover them. When that was done, they all mounted once more and jogged along again, on the path towards the east. "Where did you go, if I may ask?" said Thorin to Gandalf as they rode along. "To look ahead," he said. "And what brought you back in the nick of time, looking behind?" said he. "Exactly," said Thorin. But could you be more plain? I went on to spy out our road. It will soon become dangerous and difficult. I was also anxious about replenishing our small stock of provisions. And I had not gone very far, however, when I met a couple of friends of mine from Rivendell. "Where's that?" asked Bilbo. "Don't interrupt," said Gandalf. "You will get there in a few days now, if we're lucky, and find out all about it. As I was saying, I met 2 of Elrond's people. They were hurrying along the fear of the trolls. It was they who told me that 3 of them had come down from the mountains and settled in the woods not far from the road. They had frightened everyone away from the district, and they waylaid strangers. I immediately had a feeling that I was wanted back. Looking behind, I saw a fire in the distance and made for it. So now you know. Please be more careful next time, or we shall never get anywhere." "Thank you," said Thorin.
The Hobbit, Chapter 3. A Short Rest. They did not sing or tell stories that day, even though the weather had improved. Nor the next day, nor the day after that. They had begun to feel the danger was not far away on either side. They camped under the stars, and their horses had more to eat than they had, for there was plenty of grass, but there was not much food in their bags, even with what they had got from the trolls. One morning they forded a river at a wide, shallow place, full of the noises of stones and foam. The far bank was steep and slippery. When they got to the top of it, leading their ponies, they saw that the grey mountains had marched down very near to them. Already they seemed only a day's easy journey from the feet of the nearest. Dark and dreary it looked, though there were patches of sunlight on its brown sides, and behind its shoulder tips the snowy peaks gleamed. "Is that the mountain?" asked Bilbo in a solemn voice, looking at it with round eyes. He had never seen a thing that looked so big before. "Of course not," said Balin. "That's only the beginning of the Misty Mountains, and we have to get over or under those somehow, before we can come into the wilderness beyond. And it's a deal away from the other side of them to the lonely mountain in the east where smoke lies on our treasure. Oh, said Bilbo, and just at that moment he felt more tired than he ever remembered feeling before. He was thinking once again of his comfortable chair before the fire in his favorite sitting room in his hobbit hole, and of the kettle singing, not for the last time. Now Gandalf led the way. We must not miss the road, or we shall be done for, he said. We need food for one thing, and rest in reasonable safety. It is also necessary to tackle the misty mountains by proper path, or else you will get lost in them and have to come back and start all at the beginning again, if you ever get back at all. They asked him where he was making for, and he answered, You are come to the very edge of the wild. As some of you may know, hidden somewhere ahead of us is the fair valley of Rivendell, where Elrond lives in the last homely house. I sent message by my friends, and we are expected. That sounded nice and comforting, but they had not got there yet, and it was not so easy as it sounds to find the last homely house of west of the mountains. There seemed to be no trees and no valleys, no hills to break ground in front of them, only one vast slope, slowly going up to meet the feet of the nearest mountain. A wide land, the color of heather and crumbling rock, with patches and slashes of grass green and moss green showing where water might be. Morning passed, afternoon came, but in all the silence waste there was no sign of any dwelling. They were growing anxious, for they saw now that the house might be hidden almost anywhere between them and the mountains. They came on unexpected valleys narrow with its steep side that opened so suddenly at their feet. They looked down to see trees below them and running water at the bottom. There were gullies that they could almost leap over, but very deep with waterfalls in them. There were dark ravens that one could neither jump over nor climb into. There were bogs, some of them green, pleasant to look at, with flowers growing bright and tall. But a pony that walked there with a pack on its back would never come out again. It was indeed much wider land from the ford to the mountains than you would have ever guessed. Bilbo was astonished. The path was marked with white stones, some of which were small, and others were half covered with moss or heather. Altogether, it was very slow business following the track, even guided by Gandalf, who seemed to know his way about pretty well. His head and his beard waged this way and that as he looked for the stones, and they followed his lead. But when they seemed no nearer to the end of the search, when the day began to fail, tea time had long gone by, and it seemed separate time would soon do the same. There were moths fluttering about, and the light had became very dim, for the moon had not risen. Bilbo's pony began to stumble over roots and stones. They came to the edge of the steep fall in the ground so suddenly that Gandalf's horse nearly slipped down the slope. Here it is at last, he called, and the others gathered around him and looked over the edge. They saw a valley far below. They could hear the voice of hurrying water in a rocky bed at the bottom. The scent of trees was in the air, and there was a light on the valley across the water. Bilbo never forgot the way. They slithered and slipped in the dusk down the steep zigzag path into the secret valley of Rivendell. The air grew warmer as they got lower, The smell of the pine trees made him drowsy, so that every now and again he nodded off and nearly fell off, or bumped his nose on his pony's necks. Their spirits rose as they went down and down. The trees changed to beech and oak. There was a comfortable feeling in the twilight. The last green had almost faded out of the grass when they came at length to an open glade, not far above the banks of the stream. It smells like elves, Bilbo thought, and he looked up at the stars. They were burning bright and blue. Just then came a burst of song like laughter in the trees. Oh, what are you doing and where are you going? Your ponies need showing, the river is flowing. Oh, tra-la-la-lee, down here in the valley. Oh, what are you seeking and where are you making? The faggots are reeking, the Bangkoks are beaking. Oh, tra-la-lee, the valley is jolly, ha-ha. Oh, where are you going with beards a wagging, not knowing what brings Mr. Baggins and Balin and Dan down to the valley in June, ha-ha. Oh, will you be staying or will you be flying? Your ponies are straying, the daylight is dying. To fly would be folly, to stay would be jolly, to listen and lark to the end of the dark, to our tune, ha-ha. So they laughed and sang in the trees, and pretty fair nonsense, I dare say, you think it? Not that they would care. They would only laugh all the more if you told them. They were elves, of course. Soon Bilbo caught a glimpse of them as the darkness deepened. He loved elves. Though the solemn met them, he was a little frightened of them too. Dwarves don't get on well with them. Even decent dwarves like Thorin and his friends think them foolish, which is a very foolish thing to think, or get annoyed with them. For some elves tease them and laugh at them and most of all at their beards. Well, well, said a voice, just look. Bilbo the Hobbit on a pony. My dear, isn't it delicious? Most astonishingly wonderful. Then off they went into another song as ridiculous as the one I have written down in full. At last, a tall young fellow came out of the trees and bowed to Gandalf and Thorin. Welcome to the valley, he said. Thank you, said Thorin in a bit gruffly, but Gandalf was already off his horse and among the elves, talking merrily with them. You're a little out of your way, said the elf. That is, if you're making for the only path across the river and to the house beyond, we will set you right, but you best get on foot until you are over the bridge. Are you going to stay a bit and sing with us, or will you go straight on? Supper is preparing over there, he said. I can smell the wood fires for the cooking. Tired as he was, Bilbo would have liked to stay a while. Elvish singing was not a thing to miss in June under the stars, not if you care for such things. Also, he would have liked to have a few private words with these people who seemed to know his name and all about him, though he had never seen them before. He thought their opinion of his adventure might be interesting. Elves know a lot and are wondrous folk for news, and know what is going on among the peoples of the land as quick as water flows, or quicker. But the dwarves were off for supper as soon as possible, but the inn would not stay. They all went, leading their ponies till they were brought to a good path, and so at last to the brink of the river. It was flowing fast and noisily, as mountain streams do of a summer evening, when the sun has been all day on the snow far up above. There was only a narrow bridge of stone, without any parapet, as narrow as a pony could well walk on, and over that they led to go, slowly and carefully, one by one, each leading his pony by the bridle. The elves brought bright lanterns to the shore and sang a merry song as the party went across. Don't dip your beard in the foam, Father, they cried to Thorin, who was bent almost to his hands and knees. It's long enough without watering it. Mind Bilbo doesn't eat all the cakes, they called. He's too fat to get through the keyholes yet. Hush, hush, good people, and good night, sang Gandalf, who came last. Valleys have ears, and some elves who have merry tongues. Good night. And so at last they came to the last homely house, and found its doors flung wide. Now it is a strange thing, but things that are good to have, and days that are good to spend, are soon told about, and not much to listen to, while things that are uncomfortable, palpitating, and even gruesome make a good tale, and a deal of telling them away. They stayed in that good house 14 days at least, and they found it hard to leave. Bilbo would have gladly stopped there forever and ever, even supposing a wish would have taken him right back to his hobbit hole without trouble. There is little to tell about their stay. The master of this house was an elf friend, one of whose people whose fathers came into strange stories before the beginning of history. The wars of the evil goblins and elves, and the first men in the north. In those days of our tale, there were some people who had both elves and heroes of the north for ancestors. And Harold, the master of the house, was their chief. He was a noble and fair in a face as an elf lord. He was as strong as a warrior, as wise as a wizard, as vulnerable as the king of dwarves, and was as kind as summer. He comes into many tales, but his part in this story of Bilbo's great adventure is only a small one, though important, as you will see, if we ever get to the end of it. His house was perfect, whether you liked food, sleep, or work, or storytelling, or singing, or just sitting and thinking best, or a pleasant mixture of them all. Evil things did not come into that valley. I wish I had time to tell you even a few of the tales or one or two of the songs that they heard in the house. All of them, the ponies as well, grew refreshed and strong in a few days there. Their clothes were mended as well as their bruises, their tempers and their hopes. Their bags were filled with food and provision, light to carry them, but strong to bring them over the mountain passes. Their plans were improved with best advice. So the time came to Midsummer's Eve, and they were to go again with the early sun on a midsummer's morning. Erland knew all about runes of every kind. That day he looked at the sword they had brought from the troll's lair. These are not trolls' make. They are old swords, very old swords, of the high elves of the west by kin. They were made in Gondolin for the goblin wars. They must have come from a dragon's hoard or a goblin's plunder, for dragons and goblins destroyed that city many ages ago. This thorn, the ruins named Orchester, the the goblin cleaver made in this ancient tongue of Glarden. It was a famous blade. This Glandalf was glamoring, faux hammer that the king of Glondon once wore. Keep them well. Whence did the trolls get them, I wonder, said Thorin, looking at the sword with new entrance. I cannot say, said Elrond, but one may guess that your trolls had plundered other plunderers or had come on the remnants of old robbers in some hold in the mountains. I've heard that there are still forgotten treasures of old to be found in the desert caverns of the mines of Minora, since the dwarves and the goblin war. Thorin pondered these words. I will keep this sword in honor, he said. May it soon cleave goblins once again. That is a wish that is likely to be granted soon enough in the mountains, said Elrond, but show me your map. He took it and gazed at it long at it. He shook his head, for he did not altogether approve of the dwarves and their love of gold. He hated dragons and their cruel wickedness, and he grieved to remember the ruin of the town Dale and its merry bells and the buried banks of the bright river running. The moon was shining in a broad silver crest. He held up the map, and the white light shone through it. What is this, he said. There are moon letters here, beside the plain ruins, which say 5 feet high. The dwarf and may walk 3 abreast. What are moon letters? Asked the Hobbit, full of excitement. He loved maps, as I have told you before, and he also liked runes and letters and cunning handwriting. Though he often wrote himself, it was a bit thin and spidery. Moon letters are rune letters, but you cannot see them, not when you look straight at them. They can only be seen when the moon shines behind them. And what is more, the cunning sorts, it must be a moon of the same shape and season as the day they were written. The dwarfs invented them and wrote them with silver pens, as your friends can tell you. These must have been written on a midsummer eve, a crescent moon, a long while ago. What did they say? Asked Gandalf and Thorin together, a bit vexed perhaps that even Harold should have found this out first, though they really had not been another chance before, and there would have not been another until goodness knows when. Stand by the grey stone, and when the thrush knocks, read Harold, and the sun setting with the last day of Durin's day, the will shine upon the keyhole. Durin, said Thorin. He was the father of the fathers of the eldest race of dwarves, the Longbeards. He is my first ancestor. I'm his heir. What is Durin's day? Asked Elrond. It's the first day of Dwarves' New Year, said Thorin. It is as all should know the first day of the last moon of autumn, on the threshold of winter. We still call it Durin's Day when the last moon of autumn and the sun are in the sky together. But this will not help us much, I fear, for it passes our skill these days to guess when such a time will come again. That remains to be seen. Is there any more written? None to be seen by this moon, said Edelroyd, and he gave the map back to Thorin. And then they went down to the water to see the elves dance and sing upon Midsummer's Eve. The next morning was a midsummer's morning, as fair and as fresh as it could be dreamed. A blue sky and never a cloud. The sun was dancing on the water. They rode away amid songs of farewell and good speed, with their hearts ready for more adventure, and with the knowledge of the road they must follow over the misty mountains into the land beyond.
Wow. What a day. What a story. What an incredible time we've had. Oh my gosh. It's been a full day following around Bilbo Baggins and Gandalf and the crew. Man, what a day. I thought they were in for it when they got tangled up with those trolls, but Gandalf saved the day. I'm so glad that you took time to join us tonight, and I'm very grateful to Seth and to Julianne for your really wonderful reading of chapters 2 and 3 of The Hobbit. I hope you can all come back and join us again next Friday evening. Again, 7 p.m. sharp will be the premiere of episode 3 of Friday Nights with Bilbo Baggins, when we will hear chapters 4 and 5 read to us. So I really hope you're able to come back and join us. I feel like the day has been fulfilled in hearing this reading. I've had a good day, a wonderful trot through the woods, and a great evening with two wonderful storytellers. So I'm set for a nap. Perhaps you are too. Good night, my friends. God bless you all. And I'll look forward to seeing you back here on St. Aidan's YouTube channel next Friday night, 7 p.m.